Hello everyone, it's me, Pastor TJ. I'd like to welcome you today to Trinity Community Church. Now before we get started, I just got to tell you a couple things. First, you're missed and you're loved. We can't wait until we can meet together again physically. Now, until that time, know this, we're still together virtually. We're connected by the bond of the Spirit, and we're connected by our love for each other. So don't lose your mind, don't freak out, and remember this, you are not alone. Now, I'm excited today because we get to start our brand new series called Hope in the Dark. How many of you know that sometimes life does not unfold the way you anticipate it? Sometimes life, isn't quite like a Hallmark movie. How many of you are familiar with the Hallmark movies? My wife loves Hallmark movies. It's amazing. Within an hour, you can have these two people whose lives are a wreck. They come together. By the way, I think every Hallmark movie's got the same plot. You have these two people that they hate each other at first, and then they fall in love in the end, and they change up the characters and they change up the settings. Sometimes she's a baker, sometimes she's a corporate lawyer. We don't know. That's part of the mystery of it. But what we do know is this. Within that hour, these two people, they find love, they reconnect, and life lives on happily ever after. How many of you know that sometimes life does not end up as happily ever after? But what do you do when it doesn't? This entire month, we're going to look at how you and I can hold on to hope in the midst of that. Now, before we get rolling with that, there's a few things that I need you to do for me. First, if you're watching on Facebook, we're going to ask you to please like our page and then share the service link with as many people as you possibly can. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel and share our services and our videos with your friends and your neighbors. By doing this, you're helping us at Trinity Community Church to accomplish our core mission, which is to make disciples of all nations. You're also helping us to flood our community in the world with God's love, power, and His presence. Again, sometimes life does not unfold the way we anticipate it to. Sometimes things happen in our lives that we just can't prepare for. Things that try to rob us of our faith. It's in those times that we need Jesus the most. Before we get rolling, take a look at this. Now, all of us have had our faith tested. All of us have had our faith shaken. All of us encounter things that we don't anticipate happening in our lives, but sometimes those things come at us and they're so big, they're so strong, they're so unexpected. Without the help of God, without Him helping us to navigate those things, man, they can sink us, they can destroy us. Let me introduce you to somebody. This is my friend Jade. Robin and I have known Jade and Mark Anderson for over a decade now. I remember the first time that I met Jade. She was one of the first people that we met going into Delaware, and she was this bubbly lady, and she was sassy, and she was funny, and she was gifted, and you always knew where you stood on Jade's list. She always, there was never a mystery of what was going on in her head. Little did we know that when we first met Mark and Jade, that they would become lifelong friends with us. We would spend holidays together. Our kids would grow up together. Just a beautiful, beautiful friendship and relationship. Now, as we got to know Jade, more of her gifts started to become more evident to us. They started to just leak out. We found out that Jade is a strong leader. We found out that Jade is deeply prophetic. We found out that she's a great teacher, and she's also an amazing worship leader. When Jade comes in and she leads worship, man, she shifts atmospheres. She's an absolutely amazing person. In fact, Jade to this day is still one of the strongest, deepest women that I've ever met before. A few months ago, we got word from Jade and Mark that she was diagnosed with breast cancer. All of us are one call away from having our lives completely turned upside down, shifted. And I still remember when she called us and she told us what was going on, it hit us like a freight train. What do you do when you get that call? What do you do when you're going from normal and then you're just thrown into crisis mode when it comes to your life and your health and even your family? As I was preparing this talk, I asked Jade, I said, Jade, would you privilege me to be able to tell a little bit of your story today? So this is part of Jade and her experience in her own words. On December 1st, I went to the ER thinking that I was having a heart attack. It was a Sunday. I had led worship that morning and truly felt a beautiful presence, different than usual. God often does that with me. He shows up before most of the rough things in my life can, so I can look back at that beautiful time of worship just hours before this experience. So when the ER doctors came back into the room and they said, "You have cancer. It's pretty serious. There's nothing we can do for you here, but you need to see your doctor immediately tomorrow morning. Tell them it cannot wait." I thought I was going to throw up. They handed me some papers and they showed me what the scans had showed them, but I didn't understand any of it. I just sat there for a couple of minutes. I looked at Mark and I said, "I'm scared." And he just nodded. They eventually discharged me and we went home. I can honestly say at that point, I was walking a thin line between terror and numbness. I knew that I had to grab a hold of my faith even then. I knew that I could not allow myself to spiral into the terror part. If I believe what I say I believe, then living in terror is not an option. So I tried to sit with it, look at it, feel it, but then shift my focus. I kept telling myself that He does heal. I kept reminding myself that what God says about me in my situation is what's true, not what the doctors say. But this was an almost constant cycle. I found it hard to work or to interact with people for a few days because I was working so hard to try to process and keep everything together. I'd sing a lot of worship songs, mostly because I couldn't form a prayer. But when I sing, He can hear my heart and I can hear His. So I would sob and sing a lot. A few days later, when we were with the radiologist, she confirmed what the ER doctors had said. It did go all the way to numb. I did for a few hours. I remember looking at Mark's face and he looked so sad and scared. And I knew that I was in no shape to process that. So I went onto autopilot. I never did ask God why. I'd never been one of those believers who thinks that because I show up to church, teach a class, do some stuff, that my life will be perfect. I do not believe that He did this to me. So that was not even a conversation. The real conversations were along these lines of, "Lord, I trust You, I do. And I do want Your will for my life. But I want Your will for my life to be that I live. I want to see my kids grow. I want to be there when they marry, when they have babies, when they move out. You gave me these kids when the doctor says that I couldn't have them. I don't believe that You did that so I could stop being their mom before they're all grown. I just don't believe that. So I'm believing that God, You'll heal me. And when You heal me, again, You'll heal me either through chemo, surgery, radiation, or through radical, unexplainable healing. Either way, I'll keep stepping up until somebody says, no more cancer." Faith is easy when everything's going good your way. Faith is easy when the sun is shining and the breeze is warm and everything is just working out perfectly. Faith is tough when you experience the valley of the shadow of death. Now, this is Jade. She finished her last chemo just recently, and her and Mark are doing well. Someday, I hope that you get to meet Jade in person. Now, if you came to Christ with the understanding that all of the problems in your life would go away, they would just dissipate, they would go away, and your life would be perfect from here on out, you were lied to. Again, you were lied to. Jesus promised us this. He says, "In this world, you will have trouble." But He said this, "Take heart, I have overcome the world." That means this, all of us are going to walk through dark valleys from time to time. Now again, it's terrible that you and I have to walk through dark places. It is, but it's necessary. All of us walk through darkness. Have you ever found yourself in a dark place? I remember years ago I was hunting in Pennsylvania, and we hunted out in the Poconos, the Allegheny National Forest, and we had some big spots and some open land with an old logging company, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres. And I remember in our family, there was this ginormous rock that sat and it oversaw this entire valley. And my cousin always got that rock, and that year his wife was having a baby, so he couldn't sit on the rock, so the rock fell to me. So what we would do is we would get in our places at night, and then we would wait for the sun to come up, so we were in perfect prime position to hunt animals. So I remember walking through the darkness. We'd mark trails to get to where we were going to go. I found this big rock. I had my flashlight, and everything was fine as long as I had my flashlight. And I remember getting to this big rock and then getting settled in, and it was, getting set, sitting down and everything like that. And then I remember sitting on the rock and shutting off my flashlight. And let me tell you something. It was cold and it was dark. I mean, really dark. Like you couldn't hardly see your hand in front of your face dark. And I remember sitting on this rock, and as you're sitting there in the darkness, you become aware of your surroundings in a way that you probably have never been aware of before. And I can hear things moving around me in the dark. Now, I can't see them. I can't tell exactly where they're at, but I'll tell you what, with each break of a branch, with each rustle of a leaf, I was aware that there were things probably looking at me that I couldn't see. I mean, what were they? Were they bunnies? Were they coyotes? Were they pumas? Were they Sasquatch? Probably a Sasquatch, just hanging out. And I can tell you this, in the darkness, my mind started to race and just started to run amok. Have you ever been there? I could not wait for that sun to come up. When that sun came up, forget about the deer. I just wanted to know that I was safe, and if something was going to jump on me, that I'd be able to see it and at least have a fighting chance. I understand that Greeks are succulent people, so I get it. I get it. Have you ever been in darkness? Have you ever found yourself in a place like that? The dark can be scary. Is it possible for you and I to hold on to hope even when things are dark, even when you and I are in the middle of crisis? Yes, it is possible. So what do we do when you and I face dark and impossible situations? Well, we do what we do with everything else. We look to God. If you got your Bibles, turn to Exodus chapter 14, verse 10. This is going to be really where we're going to kind of hang out today with our passage. Now, as you're turning there, let me kind of set up what we're going to read today. This is the story of Moses. We find that Moses is here, and God raises up Moses. It's in the book of Exodus. He sees the burning bush. The burning bush is an answer to the prayers of the Hebrews that are enslaved by the Egyptians. The Egyptians were harsh slave masters to them, and they cried out to God for a deliverer, and God sent them a deliverer. He sent them Moses. He raised up Moses. So Moses accepted his call, and he went with Aaron, and he went and he approached the Pharaoh, and he said to the Pharaoh, he says, God tells you this, Pharaoh, let my people go. And the Pharaoh refused. So God, again, displayed his power to the most powerful nation on earth at that time, and he sent plagues, 10 plagues to Egypt, and finally the Pharaoh said, Uncle, do whatever you need to do, just leave, get out of my face. So Moses mobilized the children of Israel, and they left, and they started to walk out in their freedom. Now, as they were leaving, while they were heading out to this new life, the Pharaoh changed his mind. And he decided to go after the kingdom of Israel, or the people of Israel, the Hebrews, to kill them and to slaughter them. So as they're moving and as they're kind of getting away from Egypt, Israel realizes that they're starting to be pursued by the Egyptians. Now they realize this just as they come to the next biggest barrier for their deliverance, the Red Sea. So here's Israel. They have the Pharaoh's army in front of them, or behind them, the Red Sea in front of them. They found themselves in an impossible situation. They found themselves stuck. They were a nation. They were a people in crisis. All of us have been there, right? We've been in a place of crisis where they didn't know what to do. Do you think Israel in that moment needed to experience hope? They did. And God came through in a mighty way. Let's read it together. It says this, as Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, why did you bring us here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves in Egypt for us? Why have you done this? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. So this is this is a people that doesn't understand what's going on. They're compelled by fear. By the way, do you know this? That in times of fear, you don't act like yourself. In times like fear, you react. You don't act like who God created you to be. That's what Israel's experiencing right now. Look at verse 13. But Moses told the people, don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. Now, through this passage, I believe that God shows us how you and I can hold on to hope even when we're in crisis mode, even when things seem dire, even when things seem dark. You and I can be anchored to hope as long as the first thing we do, we don't give in to fear. Don't give in to fear. But he gives Israel this instruction that's kind of interesting. He says, don't be afraid. He said, but this is what I want you to do. Instead of being afraid, I need you to do two things. Stand, and I need you to watch. I need you to stand, and I need you to watch. So we're going to break those things down today. First, what does it mean to stand still? When you look at the Hebrew word for stand, it actually means this, to set or to station oneself. To set or to station oneself, that's what the Hebrew word means. So what does standing in God practically entail? What does that look like for us? First, it deals with positioning. You have to position yourself. Sometimes as believers, we think that we just kind of float through life and things just kind of happen magically. Now again, as believers, we don't force open doors, but understand this, how you live out your faith positions you for how God can use you. Positioning is very important. Positioning yourself is everything. How many of you know that positioning yourself in life and in your faith is a pretty big deal? This is my brother, Tim. This is us. We were taking in a Pirate game. Tickets for the Pittsburgh Pirates are pretty easy to come by because, well, we stink. Now, right now I'm happy to announce that because the season hasn't started, the Pirates are not yet mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. So go Pittsburgh Pirates, right? It's a great time. So my brother came to visit us in Colorado one year. And as we were out there, our youth group was taking a ski trip. So they had some extra tickets. So I asked my brother, I said, hey man, I said, you want to go maybe on the mountains in Colorado? Now, I don't know if you're a skier or a snowboarder, but one of the greatest places that you can ski or snowboard on the planet is in the mountains of Colorado. So I looked at my brother, he looked at me, I said, man, we could do this. We had a little ski resort in our hometown. So we went up into the mountains and we started to do our skiing thing. So as we got up there, they were equipping us with stuff. And I'd skied before. I'm not a great skier, but I'm adequate. And I thought to myself, I would love to try out this whole snowboarding thing. I watched these guys, in the Olympics do the flips and all that stuff. And I wasn't dumb enough to think I could do all that stuff. But I thought, this might be a new change of pace to go down a mountain on a snowboard. So he and I both got snowboards, and we thought this is going to be fun. So we got on the first lift, and we were going up. We didn't go up one of the black diamonds. We went up one of the intermediate hills. And as we're on the lift, when you have skis, you got a foot in each ski. But a snowboard's just one thing, and you have a foot here and a foot here. I remember starting to think to myself, how do you get off the lift with a snowboard as opposed to skis? So I'm talking to my brother, and we're trying to figure this out in our head. And before you know it, man, we're at the top of this mountain. So we get there, and I thought, well, how tough could it be? So I do my best to position myself on one side. He positions himself on the other side. We both step off. And as we step off, both our snowboards get tangled up and we fall straight down. Now, I don't know if you've ever fallen down right off a lift, but in Denver, in those areas, they got to stop the whole lift. They got to stop the whole ride. So they stop the ride, and all the alarms go off, and they got to help me and my brother. We're two pretty big Greek guys. They help us off. All the little kids are making fun of us, and it's a humiliating experience. So we get on there, we figure out how to snowboard down, and it's a kick in the pants. We have a great time, so we decide we're going to go up again. So we go up in the mountain, and as we're going up, in the lift, we're talking to each other. Now we know what we did wrong last time. So this time, we know exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to position myself a little further to the right. He's going to go a little further to the left. We're going to step down on our good leg, that's our good foot that's not in the snowboard, and then we'll step off and everything will be fine. We come in, we're coming in for a landing. The guys recognize us. We're the two big guys that stop the whole lift. We both step off, and guess what happens? The same thing. We fall down in a heap. They got to stop the lift. They got to stop everything. These kids got to come help us. They pull us off there. These guys are making fun of us. They're trying to tell us how to do things. And I'm like, we're not idiots. We'll figure this out. So we go down the hill. We do our thing. We're having a good time. We decided we were going to take one more run for the day. We're going down one more time. How tough could it be? By this time, we figured out the lift. So we get on our lift. It's taking us up. We are talking about, we're talking out our strategy. Now, as we're talking out, my brother made this realization. He says, I know what the problem is. He said, the problem's you, TJ. The problem's you. I go, what do you mean the problem's me? He said, you're getting ready to fall down. And when you get ready to fall down, you grab a hold of me and we both go down. He says, so whatever happens, he says, we get off this lift, don't touch me. I said, it's not me. I'm not the problem. You're the problem. I said, trust me, I'm not going to touch you at all. So we get up off the lift. We're getting ready to come down. We have our strategy set up. I get off first. I slip. Guess what I do? I grab my brother. We both go down. They shut the lift off. We were banned from the lift. We couldn't use the lift anymore. We didn't want to use the lift anymore because it was stupid. Actually, I think that last run, we ended up just riding down on our tukuses because we were tired of the day, because that's a tough thing. Have you ever found yourself in the wrong position? Positioning is very important. It is. When it comes to your faith, positioning is very important. Too many times, beloved, we just float around and we expect our faith just to work out when we need it. When we don't do anything, we don't put any effort into it at all. Guys, you need to position yourself to encounter God. Did you hear me? You need to position yourself to encounter God. Now, sometimes God shows up and it's absolutely amazing. As believers, though, we also need to take time to position ourselves to encounter God. Now, we see that in the story of Elijah. Elijah is one of the greatest prophets that the world's ever seen, one of the greatest Old Testament prophets. He performs many miracles and he does just a ton of amazing things. Now, one of the things that we remember about Elijah is when he's on Mount Carmel and he challenges 450 prophets of Baal to a big showdown. Now, the challenge was simple. They both built these altars, and whichever God answered and consumed the altar with fire was the true God in Israel. So they do it. The prophets of Baal, they do their dancing, they do their cutting, they do all the stuff, and they're praying to their God, and guess what happens? Nothing. Nothing happens. Then Elijah goes. He prays, and fire comes down from heaven, consumes the sacrifice, and it's a big victory for the kingdom of God on that day. They put to death all the false prophets of Baal, and Elijah was a hero. He's a big hero. Until King Ahab and his wife Jezebel declare that he's not. And Jezebel says, I want that guy killed. So what does this great man of faith do after he hears that the queen wants him dead? He's just called down fire from heaven. What does this guy do when this woman wants to kill him? You know what he does? He runs for his life. That is the power of a woman. I don't understand it, but it was back then and it still works today, right? So Elijah runs for his life. He's tired. He's feeling sorry for himself. He finds this little cave that he's living in for a little bit, and God's taking care of him. He's refreshing him. He's bringing him food. He's bringing him water. He's helping him. And Elijah finds himself in a place where he just wants to encounter God. He's tired. He needs an encounter from God. Have you ever found yourself there? You're weary, you're tired, you just need to encounter God. So he cries out to God, and God gives Elijah this wonderful gift, an invitation to encounter him. He says, Elijah, I want you to come out and I want you to meet me on the mountain. He gives him an invitation. He tells him where to go so that he can meet with Elijah. He says, Elijah, this is where I need you to go so you can meet with me. This is 1 Kings chapter 19. This is the story. God says, go out and stand before me on the mountain, the Lord told him. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. Verse 12, and after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak, and he went out and he stood at the entrance of the cave. And the voice said, what are you doing here, Elijah? What did Elijah do? Elijah positioned himself to encounter God. He listened to what God told him to do, and he did it. Have you positioned yourself to encounter God? Some of you are here today, and man, you feel like God is distant. You feel like God's a million miles away. I can promise you this. If you feel God is distant, God didn't move. You probably moved. God's right where he's always been. The problem isn't with God and his power and his desire to be with us. The problem is with us. So are you hoping that things in your life will just work out? Or are you actively listening and positioning yourself to be exactly where God wants you to be? God wants you to position yourself to encounter him. He does. So again, how do we practically position ourselves as believers to encounter God? Well, you seek him. You pray. You study his word. You connect yourself with other believers. That's what it means to position yourself. Don't just hope your faith is going to work out. Put energy, put effort into your faith. So first, you have to position yourself. Second, you have to plant yourself. Now, what does this mean? It means this. It's one thing to get yourself to the right spot. It's another thing to have the strength to stay there. Did you hear me? It's one thing to get to that spot. It's another thing to have the strength to stay there. As humans, we have a tendency to drift. We do. We struggle sometimes to stand firm in our faith. Now again, as believers, we love those mountaintop experiences. And they're great. But know this, it's the daily spiritual disciplines, those spiritual encounters that we need that give us the strength to stay planted. Those are the things that give us the strength to stay on top of the mountain. If you don't anchor yourself to the Word, if you don't pray, if you're not actively flowing in the power of the Holy Spirit, you will drift. You will. All of us drift. Jesus said this, he said, all of us, like sheep, we've all gone astray. That's what the Word tells us, right? So again, those spiritual disciplines, those things, reading the Word, getting connected with God every day, those are the things that give you the traction that you need to stay planted. Traction is important. Traction helps you to stand. Again, when I first got to Denver, it's a different culture than Chicago. And I was trying to embrace the whole mountain cowboy thing. And one of the things that I wanted to buy, just because of me, I wanted to buy a pair of cowboy boots. So there was a Goodwill across the street from the church. I went over to the Goodwill one day, I was just looking around, and there on the shelf, it was a God thing. I saw this black pair of shiny cowboy boots. They were $5.99. So I thought to myself, I could spend $6 to see if there's a cowboy somewhere hidden inside this Greek. So I bought the cowboy boots, don't know anything about cowboy boots at all. They were dress cowboy boots, slick on the bottom, had no idea what they were. I was just excited to get a pair. I put them on, they fit like a glove. Of course, I disinfected them really good because only the Lord knows who had their feet in there before, but hey, they were great. And I remember I took them home, I buffed them up, and I was excited to unveil these cowboy boots for everybody in the church. I had my jeans on, had all the stuff. I remember it was January and it was a little slick outside because it was cold and we had some snow. And the way our church was set up, there was a little bit of a tilt, and we had water would come down the gutters and it would kind of ice over the parking lot every once in a while. So you had to be careful when you got out of your car. So I remember driving my truck to the church, and I stepped out, opening the door, and I put my feet on the parking lot. And again, I don't know the difference between cowboy boots. I didn't know that dress cowboy boots really don't have any tread. They're just smooth on the bottom. And then there's other working boots that you use to work farms and all that stuff. Well, I had dress boots. So I remember standing out there, and immediately I realized we had a problem because I couldn't get any traction. My feet, I couldn't stand up. And I basically looked like a cartoon. How many of you remember Scooby-Doo? Remember they'd run in place for like 4 minutes and then they'd go? That's how I felt. And I'm flopping around. Again, there's people all over the place because we share a parking lot with Goodwill. And the worst thing that could happen to me in front of a bunch of people happens. I start to fall in slow motion. Have you ever started to fall in slow motion? My feet kicked out from under me and I'm holding on for dear life to try to not fall, and I end up falling, and I gently fall to the parking lot, and because of the slant, I slide down the parking lot on my tuchus, and I eventually, it's a decent sized parking lot, so as I slant and I go and I start sliding, I pick up speed, I'm going faster and faster and faster and faster, until finally, thank goodness, the fence stops my descent. And I sit there and I'm humiliated. I got these new boots on. I'm all gooked up because of all the slush and everything like that. And then I poke my head up. I'm thinking, I hope to goodness nobody saw me. And as I poke my head up, I look over and about 4 people are at their cars in the Goodwill. And one of the guys just starts to do this. It was a pretty humbling experience. You know what was humbling worse after that? I couldn't walk up the little hill with my cowboy boots because they were too slick. So you know what I had to do? I had to take my boots off and walk up the hill in my socks. I did. And then I just took my boots and I threw them in the church because I didn't even want to see them. Traction is a big deal. I didn't have the right shoes on to keep me where I needed to be so I could get into the door. How's your spiritual footing? Are you planted? What gives you traction? Your spiritual disciplines. How is your spiritual footing? Do you find yourself moving from faith to fear, faith to fear, faith to fear all the time? If you feel that, if you're experiencing that, guess what? You're not firmly planted. You're drifting. Again, if your Christian life's like a roller coaster ride of emotion, some days you're good, some days you're bad, and there's no consistency, guess what? You're drifting. You're not planted. Planted means this. It's knowing who you are in Christ and standing in a place of confidence. 1 Corinthians 15:58 puts it this way. It says, so now, beloved ones, stand firm and secure. Live your lives with an unshakable confidence. We know that if we prosper and excel in every season by serving the Lord, because we're assured that our union with the Lord makes our labor productive with fruit that endures. Again, stand firm, stand secure. That's the goal. That's how we get traction. So again, first, standing means you position yourself. Second, standing means that you plant yourself. Third, standing means that you posture yourself. What does that mean? Again, it's one thing to get in your spot. It's another thing, again, to stay in your spot. But the most important thing that you and I need to remember is this. The only reason you and I can even get and stand in that spot is because of the grace of God. Again, God is God and we're not. So the children of Israel find themselves in a very bad spot. They have the Red Sea in front of them. They have Pharaoh's army behind them. Their only recourse is to humble themselves and to cry out to God for divine intervention. That's it. They're faced with death. Do you know that sometimes God allows you to get into desperate situations? Why does He allow you to be desperate sometimes? Why does He do that? To remind you that God, the God that helps you now, that can help you tomorrow, today and tomorrow, is the same God that's helped you in your past. Again, He allows us to empty us of ourselves so that He can display His power through us. He does this so that we can depend on Him in every situation. God did not bring you this far to leave you. You can stand and be still in God's presence because He has established a track record with you. Think back right now of all the times God has come through in your life. Think about all those times. Psalm 46:10 says this. It says, "Be still and know that I am God." Just the knowledge of what God's done for us, just reading the Word and the knowledge of all the things that He's done gives us the strength, the posture to be still. Guys, sometimes life isn't about all the things that you can do. Sometimes life is about who you know, the God that you know. Again, we know that He's God and we're not. So it's in our stillness. That's when we take our hands off the situation. That's in that posture we say, Lord, I can't do this, but you can. It's in our weakness that God shows us that He's God. It is. Guys, sometimes you have to be weak for God to display all of the might of His power through you. Now let me ask you a question. Is there a situation happening in your life right now that you need to just take your hands off of? Everything you've tried seems to make it worse. Maybe it's time for you to stand and be still and know that God is enough. Let's just take a pause right here. Now again, if there's something in your life right now, maybe it's a situation that's been driving you nuts. Right now, talk to God and say, Lord, I'm going to take my hands off it. Show me what you want me to do in the middle of this situation. Let's just take a breath and let's be still. So when it comes to finding hope in the middle of crisis, the first thing that you and I need to be able to do is learn how to stand. Now, the second thing we need to learn how to do is to watch, to keep our eyes on God. Now, what does it mean to watch? Well, the definition, the Hebrew word for watch is ra, which actually means this, to see or to perceive. So when we talk about watching God or seeing and perceiving God, what are some things that we need to do to live that out? Well, the first thing is this, you need to be able to focus. Now, what does it mean to focus? Focus is important for us. I don't know how many of you out there today and you're wearing your glasses. I remember I had great vision until I got about 40. And then I noticed, reading books and stuff like that got really hard. Well, my eyes started to change and now I got these little cheater glasses so I can read pages. Focus is pretty important. What does it mean to focus? Well, this is the definition of focus. To look directly at an object so you can see it more clearly. Seeing clearly is pretty important. It's important for all of us. It's important physically. It's also important spiritually. Now, I remember it was about November when Robin and I were invited to come and meet everybody here at Trinity Community Church. The church was gracious enough to put us up in the DoubleTree Hotel, which is right next to the mall. So we were there. And while we were there for that weekend, they also had a convention. There was about 2,000 women at that convention, older women, and they were there meeting. They had all the conference rooms up, and the hotel was just all abuzz. It was amazing. I remember one morning, Robin and I were eating breakfast in the little breakfast nook that was down there. Free breakfast was very nice, and all these women were everywhere, and I had to use the restroom. So I looked up, I said, I'm gonna use the restroom. I noticed it was around the corner, and the weirdest thing was going on because the conference was all women. I don't know if they changed the signs or they did whatever they were doing there, but as you walked in, it said men and women, the man was on the right side, the woman was on the left side, but then when you walked in, the nameplates were reversed. So I walked into what I thought the men's room was, and I went in there, I was all by myself, and I went in there and I started to just kind of do what I was supposed to do in the bathroom. And then, to my horror, the door opened up and I heard voices. Except the voices were not low, deep, manly voices. They were high female voices. And I remember thinking to myself, oh no, either they're in the wrong place or I'm in the wrong place. And then the stall right next to me, the door opened up and I heard commotion and I saw feet next to me and I looked down and the feet of the person that was next to me, they did not have man shoes on, they had female shoes on. That's right, I found myself in the wrong bathroom during a convention with 2,000 women while Robin and I were coming to visit you at Trinity Community Church. So I'm sitting there, I began to pray quickly. I didn't know what to do. I thought to myself, this could go south very quickly. Word gets out, who's this guy hanging out in the ladies' restroom? You know, it's a mistake, it was an accident. I think that's probably what everybody says that goes into the wrong bathroom. So I didn't know what to do. Again, there's 2,000 ladies at this convention right now, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm in the ladies' room, there's gonna be a woman in here for the next 22 years. So I sat there, I prayed, I waited, and then finally I heard the door shut and I heard this silence and I thought, it's time for me to move. I jumped up real quick and there was nobody in the bathroom. I shot out the bathroom. There was about 4 ladies that saw me come out of the ladies' room. I went in and grabbed Robin. I said, Robin, it's time to go. She said, well, I'm not done yet. I said, oh, you're done. And I grabbed her and we took off as quick as we could. Why? Well, because I made an error because I thought I saw something, but actually it was something else. I misidentified. I wasn't focused on those things. Have you ever been focused on the wrong things? Again, guys, as believers, you and I need to have clarity for what's really important in our lives. We do. Too many times our eyes are fixed on temporal things that just don't matter. Too many times we complain and we moan about things that aren't eternal, things that just don't matter. Too many times we're focused on the value system and the wisdom of the world instead of God's heart and God's value system. Don't let lesser things drive you crazy or mess up your values or attract your vision. Guys, understand this. You can't even allow suffering or fear or pain to shift your focus off of Jesus. This is what 2 Corinthians 4:17 says. It says, we view our slight, short-lived troubles in the light of eternity. We see our difficulties as the substance that produces for us an eternal, weighty glory far beyond all comparison. Verse 18 says this, because we don't focus our attention on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but the unseen realm is eternal. So here's the million-dollar question today. Are you focused on the eternal? Are you focused on what God is doing? Focus for us means that we take our eyes off of what's happening here and we put our eyes on God. We take our eyes off the problem and we put our eyes on the solution. That starts with focus. That's what you do. The second thing you do is this. We watch God through the eyes of faith. We watch our situations through the eyes of faith. We don't look at our world just through the natural. You're a supernatural being. You are. You're not just natural, you're supernatural. You've been awakened to the reality that the God that we serve specializes in the supernatural. He specializes in the impossible. He does. Again, when we look at ourselves and our world, we don't look at it just as everything is, but we look at how God created everything to work, how God created everything to interact. We look at our world through the eyes of faith. We do. Again, when you look at the world through the eyes of faith, what can't you and God accomplish? What is impossible for you and God if you perceive things that way? Again, faith is the fuel for the impossible. Did you hear me? Faith is the fuel for the impossible. I love what C.S. Lewis said about this. He said this. He said, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun is risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. What was C.S. Lewis saying? It's by his faith in God that he can understand and perceive all of creation the way that it was intended to be. Seeing our world through the eyes of faith gives God an opportunity to display his power through us in ways that, guys, are just beyond us. They are. Hebrews 11:1 puts it this way. It says, now faith brings our hopes into reality and becomes the foundation needed to acquire the things that we long for. It's all the evidence required to prove of what is still unseen. Again, so what does faith do? Faith gives us the eyes to see things before they happen. The realities of what things could be if God was left to have complete control over everything. That's what faith does. So again, when God tells us to watch, first, watching means that we have to stay focused on him, on the realities of the kingdom. Second, that we see things through the eyes of faith, not just the natural, but through the eyes of the supernatural. And third, that we look to the future. Now that day, the children of Israel experienced something that would change the course of their entire nation. that little period from when they left Egypt and their trip to the Red Sea and their time in the desert and their time eventually into the promised land, those stories are still being told to the children and the grandchildren and their children and their children and their children, and we're still talking about those things. That thing that happened so long ago still affects us. God would use that thing, that deliverance, where God delivered them from the Egyptians, and He used that to begin to establish the people of Israel, who they are today. He did. Now again, that just doesn't speak to them, but it also speaks to us. It reminds us of this. The things that God did in the past, He can also do in the future. Our God doesn't change. So God uses the Bible, these divine recordings of how God interacted with people in the past, to help to shape even our future. He does. We even see that through the words of Jesus, that because of the things that He did, He expects us to build on those things and even do greater things than He did. This is John 14:12. Now, as I read this is something that you and all are familiar with. Allow the words, these words, to really get into your heart. Listen to what He's saying. He says this, I tell you this timeless truth. The person who follows me in faith, believing in me, will do the same mighty miracles that I do. So that's amazing in itself. Well, if you follow Christ, those same things that Christ did, healings, deliverances, miracles, those same things, He says, you'll do that too. But there's a little catch too. He says, even greater miracles than these, because I go to be with my Father. Did you read that? Did you catch that? God says that as we follow Him in faith, you don't just get to experience the story of the mighty things that He's done, but it's God's will that you also do those mighty things, just like Jesus and even beyond. Now know this, you can't perform mighty miracles without mighty obstacles. You need obstacles in order to see the miraculous. You do. There's never light brighter than when the night is darker. The darker the night, the brighter the light. That's just the way that it is. Again, we can still have hope, even in these dark times, for greater things. Why? Because God promised us that. Take a look at this.
My life is built on your faithfulness. My hope is held in your promises. I take each step with your confidence, 'cause I am yours, I am yours. You never fail, you never will. I'll trust your name for greater things. You will come through, you always do. I trust your name for greater things. You cleared a way in the wilderness. You brought me back from my brokenness. You took my shame and you buried it. What you've done, I won't forget. You never fail, you never will. I trust your name for greater things. You will come through, you always do. I trust your name for greater things. I will not fear, for you are with me. And I've seen this fight from the victory. Oh, no power of hell can stand against me. 'Cause I've seen this fight from the victory. Oh, you never fail, you never will. I trust your name for greater things.
find yourself in a dark place right now, I want to encourage you. Your best days are ahead of you, not behind you. Now, if you want to know Christ, or maybe you've drifted from God and you need to reconnect with Christ, I want to encourage you. Reach out to somebody in our chat, reach out to one of our chat hosts, reach out to one of our chat pastors, or you can email us at care@trinitychurchde.com. We are here to help you stay connected to God. That's why we live, that's why our heart beats. It is. Guys, you don't have to be alone. So today, again, just in review, you and I can have hope in the midst of crisis when, first, we stand in God's presence. Now, what does that mean? When we do that, the first thing we do is we position ourselves to encounter God. Just like Elijah, position yourself to encounter God. Again, take your faith serious, take control over your faith. Second, plant yourself. Plant yourself so you can't be moved. Now again, we plant ourselves by spiritual disciplines. Spend time in prayer, spend time in worship, spend time in the Word. Third, we posture ourselves. What does that mean? That means that we humble ourselves before God. We understand that He is God and we're not. And then, after we stand, we watch. Now, watching God, again, means this. First, we focus on God. We focus on the realities of heaven, not the things of just the earth. Second, we look at our world through the eyes of faith. We see what God could do through us, what the kingdom wants to do through us. And third, we look into the future because of how God has met us in the past. We can be confident with all the things that He wants to do. Know this, beloved, God still wants to do amazing things through you and I, even in this dark season. So what's holding you back from God using you to do greater things? What's keeping you from being the person that God wants you to be? What's keeping you from seeing His love, power, and presence being displayed on the planet? So I want to encourage you this week, spend some time talking to Jesus. Talk to the Holy Spirit and say, God, I want you to use me to accomplish greater things. We at Trinity have loved spending time with you during this message. Now, if you'd like to connect with us live, head over to our website, trinitychurchde.com, and look for our schedule of live services. Now, during our live services, we've got worship, we've got prayer, and we've got tons of opportunities to connect. We'll see you there.